Hey, what's up, everyone? We'd like to thank you all for joining us. Welcome. This is Jeff Easterling, or Grim Brother 1, here with 343 Industries, and coming at you a little bit differently than normal. Today, you actually get the added benefit of not having to look at me while we are giving some information, some insider information.
But we still do.
But you still do. That's right. Those right there are the dulcet tones of one of my guests today. Actually, about a year ago, we did a cool little kind of 101 insider look at how we produce our novels. We had Jeremy Patnout from our franchise team, and we had Tiffany O'Brien from Consumer Products. And we talked a little bit about just kind of like the development process for how we go from zero to hero with our books, and we got a lot of really cool reception. And so we actually wanted to do a similar thing with our comics, because in the past year, we've actually had some really, really cool stories, some pretty fan-beloved stories told through the comic medium, and there are no two people more equipped, I believe, or at least more willing to talk to the subject matter than my guest today. From the franchise team, we have Tyler Jeffers. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you today?
I am doing quite well. And we have Scott Jobe from the Consumer Products team. What's up, man?
Hey, man. Doing well.
Oh, dude. So really just to get started before we dive in, if you can give me a quick overview of just kind of like your title and role and what you do in general here at 343, and Tyler, we'll start with you.
All right. Technically, my title is Franchise Creative Producer. I work on the franchise team alongside Jeremy, Kenneth, a handful of other folks that we do a variety of projects. One of my main responsibilities is working with Scott here on the comic books. I help drive the narrative accuracy, the visuals, the storytelling, basically help him produce all of the fun stuff that we get to do in comic books. I've also done a variety of production work on our in-game cinematics, such as Halo 2 Anniversary, Halo Wars 2, and a little bit of Forward Unto Dawn, but not a lot, kind of peppered in there here and there. But
become an instant hero when you say Halo 2 Anniversary and cinematics.
Oh, I still, did you see, I still got goosebumps when I said it, because that was such a fun project to do. And I think, that kind of covers the gist of what I do.
I always think it's funny, too. It's a very common initial response when I ask, to like, we'll talk about your role. And the first response is, well, technically my title is,
right.
Yeah.
Which is automatically indicative of like, this is what they say on the business card.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about what the truth
Yeah.
really encompasses. And Scott, what about you?
Product development manager for Consumer Products.
That sounds super fancy.
Yeah, it's
right?
way fancier.
Man.
Print and media is usually what I focus on. Comics, novels, art books, the Halo Mythos, Warfleet, and then I'm stretching out into like Fireteam Raven, the arcade game.
Yes,
That's
Fireteam Raven.
my project as well.
Yeah.
And
If anybody doesn't
Yeah.
know, too, Halo Fireteam Raven is actually, at least as of this recording, hopefully this lives on for a while, but as of this recording, Halo Fireteam Raven is a brand new arcade co-op shooter experience that actually follows a really cool ODST squad set during the events of Halo Combat Evolved, and it is now kind of officially launched and still rolling out. Obviously, it's a giant, imposing physical product.
Yeah.
So unlike a standard kind of game where you're downloading it or you're picking it up at a store, this is actually rolling out to locations all over the place. It's now at every Dave & Buster's location in North America.
Correct.
And then it's also rolling out to a whole bunch of countries around the world in the next couple months, which is super
Wow,
cool.
really? I didn't
Yeah.
hear that. That's
Yes,
awesome.
sir.
Good stuff. So
global,
all right,
baby.
Yeah.
right, all over. You're worldwide. He's going global.
That's all
See?
Scott does.
That's
no
it.
big deal.
When you got a title like that,
Yeah. Launches arcade machines worldwide.
It's easy. So let's go ahead and get into the topic at hand. I know recently we actually just finished up what I would love to coin a really successful comic endeavor, and that was with Rise of Atriox. And one of the things, too, that I think is interesting about comics, and I think you guys can probably both speak to this, is let's just talk a little bit at first about telling the stories in comics overall. Like, what are some of the strengths and weaknesses of that? Tyler, what would you say? For the
To
medium?
me, as a fan, I've always been intrigued with it because it is more of a visual storytelling.
Yeah.
The one thing, as I got into the industry and I was working through that stuff, and one of the conversations I have with a lot of my peers and other aspects is once I got into cinematic production, you start realizing, like, wow, budget becomes a big factor for stuff like that
Yep.
when you want to tell stories. Comic books, there's a budget, but regardless,
A lot of times that budget is time.
yeah, it actually
Yeah,
more
that's
so
for
in some
sure.
regards is that no matter what that writer writes on the page, that artist gets paid the same amount of money
Yep.
to draw that. So really, you have kind of this larger spectrum of what you can do with those stories versus once you get into kind of the CG or the movies, it's like,
Yeah.
ooh, well, we can't actually shoot on Mars, so we're gonna have to go pretend that we do that in CG, and then that becomes a much high ticket price as soon as it's
Yep.
on screen for X amount of pages, or excuse me, X amount of time. Whereas comic books, it's like you're kind of limitless. You can tell whatever you want, I mean, within reason. To answer your question, I think to me, what I really like about comics is that you also have a little bit of the control as a reader of the pacing and how you read it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if the artist does a big 2-page splash, you stop. You take it all in, you bask it in, and then as the more pages progress and there's more intricate panels and you're reading through and you're able to go, like, a good artist, in my opinion, can really control your eye, and also as a reader, you're able to go back and quickly read something again or re-review it immediately after, whereas with a movie, you're kind of along for the ride for a predetermined amount of time.
Yeah.
And you're there, and you're able to take everything in as fast as the director feels he wants you to. And with a comic book, you're able to kind of pace it at your own pace.
Yeah, it's interesting actually when you mention the thing about some of like the resources even. I think one of the things that we've heard fan response on really liking about the comics, and speaking even from a personal standpoint, this has always been really cool, is it actually gives us more opportunities to visualize more diverse visual elements in the universe.
Totally.
Fans will call out like,
Right,
oh, it was
right.
super cool to see 2 different models of a banshee or 2 different variants of a jackal or something like that,
Oh,
which
yeah,
is
totally.
way easier to do in a comic type medium rather than, because a lot of times we're like, well, why can't you just put all that in the cinematic or put all that in the game?
Right,
You know,
yeah.
and it's like, well, there's different issues with models and memory capacities
Right.
and
Or even
you know,
just fidelity, right? Like
Yeah,
you have,
absolutely.
I could totally put a Jackal from Halo Combat Evolved in a comic from a design perspective, right?
Dennis Swart's nightmare, by the way.
Yeah, it would look awesome because the penciler would be drawing it in a more modern day style. But you tried to put that asset in like
Yes.
another game title or another CG, like I'm going to spend a lot of money making that thing look good, and it's going to look just as good as the newer version of that
Right.
model, basically.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Scott, I know we've had similar conversations too, as far as some of the. What would you say are some of the challenges? Like, what are the biggest challenges? I think with working, because you work especially like with our partners and creative teams on focusing on some of the constraints of the medium as well. Like, what are some of the challenges there?
It's really about telling the story in a way that you can get it through the pages and understand what's happening without having to go super deep
Yeah,
into the storytelling.
yeah,
There can be a quick couple lines of dialogue and a line of description about what's in this panel,
yeah.
and really getting that out to the reader and in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, I think another thing too that is sometimes a struggle is even the juxtaposition of the medium itself with our other maybe main channels as well.
yeah.
So when you think about, like, a lot of times it's a really sometimes a difficult and challenging line to straddle where you want to do really cool and important and impactful things and tell those impactful stories without feeling like you're alienating people who are like, oh, I needed to go and read a comic to experience this thing.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
at the same time, you want to give your comic readers these really cool
Yeah.
moments, like, while at the same time, it's almost like a little catch-22. It's like if something really important happens, you're like, why would you do this in the comic? And then
Right.
if
Right.
nothing important happens, like, why do I need to read your comic?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And there has certainly been some areas where we felt that the choices that we made were straddling that line sufficiently, and the fan base has come back and said, "Why did you do that in a comic book? We would have rather that been a game moment," and vice versa. And I know that we've also had moments where we would love to be able to tell like a prologue story to some cool thing that's coming out, but we've definitely heard the feedback of that then turns it into less of, not necessarily less enjoyable, more of a, this is now required reading for you to understand what this object is. And one thing that I've always felt we try to do is, I always try to take key moments, cool ideas, really cool things that we like in the Halo universe, and look at how we can like expand horizontally, for lack of a better description, as opposed to making it kind of the same story that's all tying together everything that we're doing.
So you're not missing links in the chain, essentially.
Right. But still, to your point, making it meaningful, or trying to find key characters or key areas or environments or things that people like and react well to them.
Yeah. And so again, it always go back to like, how do we reward the investment of people who do invest the time and money, but also not punish necessarily those who don't.
I hate saying it that way, but I know that some people feel that way.
Alienate, I guess, is a better way.
And I've done that way. I've gone to the comic shop and I keep buying the same issue after issue. I'm like, well, I want to complete this series because I'm a collector. I read it and I'm like, man, this book just isn't really what I thought it was going to be. But you still go there and buy it because you want to support it, and you also want to, finish your collection. So.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I actually love about like opportunities like this to get to talk to folks kind of behind the scenes is also to get to know even the people themselves and kind of what drives them to it. Scott, can you talk just a little bit even too about like what was your pre-Halo history? How did some of your personal and professional interests get you to this point?
I did a lot of video production and film studies.
Okay.
So camera angles, how the shot juxtapositions.
Interesting, yeah.
Established shots, what's in the background, and how it all affects what you're seeing and understanding about the scene and the characters.
Yeah.
So that's where I came from pre-Halo 343, was a lot of that and a lot of creating public service announcements, short commercials, which also gave me the opportunity to tell a very quick story in a short amount of time.
So in some ways, that's great training in a way. You get 22 pages. You're like, yes, I got some room to breathe here. That's awesome. And then Tyler, I know even just coming into 343. You were always had a little bit of a personal hero thing for me because some of your background.
You never disclosed this.
Yes,
before.
Here it is. That's public.
Good thing we're not on camera.
But some of your background is in the industry is very near and dear to my heart. So you have background with one of my favorite characters in franchise, and that's Spawn.
Yeah. I really can't claim any deliberate path there other than dumb luck. I moved
kind of luck.
Yeah, I moved to Arizona for school. A friend of mine from high school moved out there and got a job. He was actually got a job as a lead programmer for Spawn.com, McFarlane Companies, and he called me up and was like, "Hey, I think I'm working for the guy that used to read a lot of his comic books back when we were in high school. What was his name? Trad McFarsome?" I was like, "Todd McFarlane?" Yeah, I'll be there in a year. Yeah. So I worked my ass off, saved a bunch of money, went out there for school. Yeah. Got a job being a content coordinator very early on, which was literally just taking files from a CD, putting them on a share, or a server, excuse me, and running ads for Diamond Previews for the art director, who was Brent Ash at the time. If you're listening to this, you are awesome. And then I eventually got into production management for the comics, became a manager of special projects before I left that company, and worked alongside Todd McFarlane on a variety of comic stuff, including Spawn, Sam and Twitch, the series Hellspawn, Haunt, amongst various other projects in that company, which was all a huge, tremendous, great learning experience. Yeah. So when the job was offered to me up at 343, I took it. I started in consumer products, and they asked, "Hey, do you still want to manage comics?" And I said yes, because I've been a comic fan since I was like 12. So the day that they tell me I can't work on comics anymore for this company is going to be a sad day, because I love it. It's just one of the things I really enjoy.
Awesome. Well, speaking of comics, let's actually kind of to dovetail that into some of our most recent forays into comics. And I know that it's been a pretty cool experience lately. It's been really nice to have some of our latest comics come out and really have some awesome fan reception. It's super cool to see write-ups from some of our community members and videos and things like that. So let's start with Rise of Atriox. Rise of Atriox, obviously something that coincides with Halo Wars 2. So it was able to, can you talk actually about like how does that come about? How are the decisions made in, like kind of at what point in the process, and how integrated is it into the process of making the cinematics for the game? But you're also thinking like, oh, well, let's expand upon this in a comic. Because in case you guys don't know, Halo Rise of Atriox is a 5-part miniseries that focuses on Atriox, who is the brute antagonist introduced in Halo Wars 2. He's the leader of the Banished. And actually, there's a neat cutscene that's in there that kind of overview tells his backstory. And the Rise of Atriox comic series, in a lot of ways, dissects that into essentially 5 parts and kind of tells his growing legend from different perspectives. It's a little bit of a Usual Suspects kind of Kaiser Sose style, which I always liked. But Scott, we can start with you. Kind of where does that come in?
Yeah, I was gonna say, you touched right on it. Is we had game, we had Halo Wars 2.
Yeah.
We had a killer new villain, and I looked at each other and was like, okay, let's tell an Atriox story. Let's really flesh this out. And
it's one of the parts where we're like, when we're on the same page as the fans. The
Yeah.
fans are like, we want to know more. You're like, so
absolutely.
do we.
Yes.
So let's make more.
So let's do it. Yeah, that's really how
and I remember, because I was the producer on the cinematics there, I still remember that meeting that we had, like early kickoff, and it was with Kevin Grace, who is the narrative director on Halo Wars 2, myself, I think Tiffany, a handful of others, and we are just going 1,000 miles an hour of like, oh, and it could be this, and we can do this. And I want to say we were at least mid-production in the cinematics at that point in time. I could be wrong, because I vividly remember there was an iteration of the script that had more of those moments in the cinematics kind of fleshed out, and then, like I was talking about before, money comes into scoping. And there was a lot of stuff that came on the cutting room floor. Some of it made it into the comic, others didn't. But I just remember us all talking, we can do the Shipmaster, and then it could be this, it could be Decimus, and I remember looking at Scott, and Scott kind of was fresh on the Halo Wars 2 boat, but we had been like in production, and I looked at him like, you have no idea what we're talking about right now, right? And he's like,
correct.
We're going to need to do a comic so that Scott knows what we're talking about.
Exactly.
There's an internal prequel comic.
So that one was really the perfect storm, to be honest. We were knee-deep in production. We knew what Atriox was at that point in time. We knew what the cinematic kind of was going to be, and we knew that there was a cool opportunity to tell more of that backstory because the game wasn't going to be able to hit with the cinematics. I think we already knew that some of the... what are they called? Phoenix logs, I think, is what we shipped. Those touched a little bit, and we had to kind of weave between a couple of those that were going out. But it was just a really good opportunity. We come off of Tales from Slip Space. We liked the anthology idea that book started with, but we didn't want to do a standalone book. We wanted to do a miniseries. So it was like everything really fell into place, both from the Dark Horse partner perspective, when the game came out, when the product was supposed to launch, and kind of just the kickoff. It was just... boom.
And I'm glad you actually mentioned the Phoenix logs because, again, that's one of those things, too, that, you see it from different perspectives when you are the recipient of the information, so on the fan and community side, and trying to absorb all this and all of our dedicated Halopedians and everything out there trying to keep track of all of this, but also from our perspective, the trying to weave in and out of those things from a development process is interesting because, like with Halo Wars 2, I remember going over Phoenix log scripts with Kenneth Peters, but we're also going over them like from Dion from Creative Assembly as well, Kevin Grace. So you have kind of these various cooks that are in that kitchen all trying to make sure that even those align with what you're seeing in the game. So that's its own process, but then
we're throwing comic books in the middle of it.
You're taking comic books, throwing that in the middle of it. When does the car salesman backstory come in for Atriox?
Something we didn't touch on.
We should have put that in the hardcover.
I thought it was the 6th issue. Like that's what it was. It should have been.
There he was selling cars.
Now let's actually juxtapose the Rise of Atriox, which is very intrinsically tied to a game, with our most recent comic. Again, a mini-series, a little bit shorter this time. So this is Halo Collateral Damage, and actually, as of this recording, we are nearing the release of issue number 3. So we're kind of like right in between the release of issue number 2 and issue number 3. So we don't want to spoil anything for issue number 3.
We're about to wrap that up.
Yeah, that's right.
So weird because it's like we read that months ago.
Yeah, that's what's tough is working that far ahead. But something like Collateral Damage is not in any way tied to a game or game product, but it is tied directly to like a character and a set of characters really, and a time period more. Can you talk a little bit about like the difference in the kind of like ideation starting points for that versus a Rise of Atriox, where you kind of know like, okay, we're basing this from this direction.
That one I think we wanted to take a break from basing on a game. Well, because there wasn't a game releasing in that window.
Yes.
But we also
made that dull easy.
Right.
we also felt that so the reception to having a story centered around a main character or a smaller group of characters was resonating with fans.
Yeah.
Versus what we were doing with Escalation, where it was kind of, infinity across the stars, and there was a variety of people coming in and out. So we wanted to make it more intimate of a story, a little bit more small, a little bit more hyper-focused on a individual character or a smaller group like Blue Team. And then on top of that, I think Jeremy was working on... I can't remember the name of that.
Silent Storm.
Silent Storm, thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had the idea of, well, wouldn't it be cool then if we had those two products kind of riff off of one another? So that's kind of where the idea coalesced from what I remember. Scott might have some other details.
That's absolutely correct. And when you don't have a game and you're in the middle of a little bit of a dark area, who better to bring back than Master Chief?
Well, and speaking of, like, in all honesty, a little bit of a dark area, that actually, even the time period that we chose is a great example of that, because what's funny is we always talk about, like, the Human Covenant War, and I think actually to a lot of, like, maybe higher level fans, most people just kind of consider the Human Covenant War as, like, the first 3 games. Right. Like the original trilogy. But like, as a lot of our, again, dedicated kind of lore liaisons would know that was a decades-long time period that is very rarely dove into, and is, there are tons. We could be telling those stories just within those couple, 2-3 decades. We could tell those for
so many
just
stories.
about ever.
Yeah, and that's it. We thought we have a little bit of wiggle room. We have some space where we can tell a story in that time frame, and not change things from the other stories.
I wish you guys
the
the only problem with audio is that you can't see Scott's face as his face also contorts to choose the words very, very carefully. But it's absolutely true. And what's funny is, we have a lot of fans out there who care obviously very much about, like, the details and the envelope essentially that we try to work in. And it's one of those things where we care absolutely just as much, if albeit differently at times, or maybe with a different set of constraints or priorities and things like that. But it can be just as tough even from our end, because then it's our fault.
Yeah, totally.
If nothing else. So how does that all go into? So right now we're just talking about from the 343 side. But what about, like, working with partners? Like, we can't do this on our own. We are not a comic business.
Absolutely.
We are not a comic publisher, producer, really. But, like, for example, and we've worked with several different, distributors. Right now, we are with our friends and partners over at Dark Horse.
Yep.
And Scott, I'll lean on you a little bit for this one. What is it like when we go to, like, choose a partner or even working with a partner? What is the kind of nature of that relationship? And also maybe what's the general division of responsibilities, even if just high level? Like, if fans are like, well, what does 343 do, and what is Dark Horse responsible for that development and distribution process?
Yeah, so we partner with them and try to decide what the best story and characters to use will be the best for the next miniseries. So obviously, when we said, hey, we want to touch on this time period with Blue Team, Dark Horse was ecstatic. Yes, let's have John and everybody back, because they see that as a big part of sales. Yeah. That's what the fans want to see. They want to see Blue Team. And it's the most recognizable character. And it's really great to be able to lean on them for that, because yes, we're 343. Like, okay, I can make sure that this meets our Halo standards and tells a good story, but I need them to be able to say, we need to launch this at this time frame in the year so that we can hit the maximum amount of sales and really get the comic out to the most fans and readers.
I think it's an important point to make, because there's a reason why starving artist is a term. Is because if you are able to just kind of do art for art's sake, you don't need to worry about sales. You don't need to worry about a business side of things. You can just kind of do whatever it is to your heart's content. But the reality of it is that we are in a business, whether it be games and comics and books. And so I think it's important too for the community to kind of take that into consideration as well, that there are prioritizations from an actual business and fiscal standpoint of, hey, we want to keep doing these awesome things. So also what are these amazing stories that we can tell, but also how do we lean on partners who have expertise and things that like resonate with fans, or again, sells really well. And we always talk, like there's a balance of those things, because there's plenty of stuff that we go into, we're like, you know what, this might not sell a whole bunch, but dang it, we want to tell this cool story, or we want to focus on this cool character. And then there's other times where we're like, hey, you know what? This is a story that will reach a lot of people. It is based off of a character or a team that resonates really, really highly and things like that. So I think it's a cool kind of thing to also consider. And I know even just from a fan perspective, I find those things interesting, because who are the men and women behind the curtain, really, pulling the strings, and like, how is it? I love the show, like how it's made, and it's the same thing with comics, because it's not just what about the inks and the pencils and the lettering and everything. It's also literally about what is the business sense. And when you look at things like, people like Marvel, you look at Dark Horse or McFarlane, like they all have their different approaches to things. And I think that's a super interesting kind of part of that process.
I agree. And I will add to what Scott said, in that Dark Horse to me is very much a collaboration with their key people. Like, we come to them with an idea, they give us some feedback, they ask us, hey, what if you tweak this? Or it would be better if we did it this way, or could we change this story to be a little bit like this? And none of their feedback has ever been like outlandish or something that seems like they're doing it for all the wrong reasons. Like, everybody that works on that is very passionate about our brand, and also very knowledgeable from the comic side just overall, and then also from the business.
That's what I was going to say. It's actually really helpful from that standpoint, because like the folks at Dark Horse are used to dealing with all sorts of franchises. And so they've got experience that is like goes even far, far beyond Halo. And it's like, how do you there's the side of how do you tell a good Halo story, and then there's also the side of how do you tell a good comic story.
Exactly.
And then it's blending those two things together. And so I think when you work with a good partner, whether it's Dark Horse or anyone, it's like those are where the best results and products kind of come out of that stuff. And then inevitably part of that process then goes into the creative team itself. So Tyler, I know that's something that you're also very, very is again near and dear to your heart, and you've been a part of the creative team process. Actually, I believe you had to tell some slip space. That's your comic IMDb. Right there.
Knight Takes Bishop.
That's right.
Yeah.
My homage to G.I. Joe number 21.
Oh, is that what that is?
That is what that is. If I only had 20 pages, that story would have been completely different. But
nice.
The creative teams on our books is something I take very seriously, and we have a lot of cool people who have contributed a lot of stuff over the years, and I think that is probably one of the most important decisions, and it's also probably one of the biggest challenges for us too, because not everybody is able to do a Halo book, right? So you run into that situation where Scott and I sit down and brainstorm with some other people on the team, like, all right, let's make a list, and I start making outlandish lists. Like, I want Mark Silvestri. Mark Silvestri, if you're listening, I want you to draw Halo. And Dark Horse quickly brings us down to reality.
Nice long list.
But in some cases, like, we've asked for people, and they're like, oh, yeah, we could probably get him. Like, Eric Canetti did the cover for Tales from Slip Space. Awesome. He was on our list, and that's like, that is a great person to have contribute to your franchise, in my opinion. We had a lot of people like that where we're like, man, I wish we could get so-and-so to write this story. Like, yeah, we can get him. No problem. So it is.
Wait, what?
What? Sweet.
Yeah. But then oftentimes you're like, man, I just wish, can we find a writer for this? But, a lot of people's schedules are booked or they just can't. In some cases, you also have people who are a little bit intimidated to dip their toe in the Halo universe.
Yes.
So that takes a little
And
bit
that
of
only becomes
kind of
more
warming up.
exacerbated the older Halo gets.
Yeah.
In all honesty.
Yeah, it's
Right.
daunting, right?
Yes.
Like, oh man, there's how many years of stuff I have to figure out, and based on some of my conversations with other people who have worked on other franchises, a lot of times they refer to us as one of the most supportive licensors that they've had because we are willing to step outside the realm of just saying approved, not approved, and actually giving them feedback.
Yeah.
We're saying, hey, I see this idea you're doing. In our universe, this works this way.
And providing the reference material for those things as well.
Right.
And to say,
Like,
write us a cool story. We can plug in the Halo stuff for you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, to me, the other aspect of that I feel is really important is being able to collaborate not only with our partner Dark Horse, but also with the creative teams that are working on the books. Like I've seen tremendous results where we're actually being able to get everybody in the same room and talk about the ideas that we want to do. And not a lot of licensed books do that. Like they don't. Which isn't a bad thing. It's a different process, but we've seen really good results because of the way we've approached it.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I remember Jeremy and Tiffany and I talking about the process, the author kind of selection process. And comics has a similar one, but with specializations where, in a broad sense, sometimes you have stories you want to tell, and then you need to find authors who could tell that story well.
Yeah.
And then there are sometimes there are creatives that you want to work with. And then it's finding what are good stories for them to actually fit into. And comics takes that maybe even to another level because it is a visual medium.
Right.
And so sometimes, and again, we have with it being a very visually oriented medium, our fans are also trained to focus on that a lot of times.
Oh, yeah.
They will point out, nope, that's the T26B
Exactly.
and not the T26C, or like...
See how Scott and I both
Yes, deep sigh is another reason why we do audio only. No. But it's interesting because with comics, sometimes, like, for example, like you brought up like Hellspawn with Spawn, so I speak from a personal standpoint. That's something where stylistically, or somebody like Ashley Wood has a very specific like style, or when you look, we were fortunate enough to have like Mobius contribute to the original Halo graphic novel. That is something where you look at that and be like, well, that's not necessarily the canonical color palette of the Scarab there, but you're not worrying about that because that is
it's Mobius.
That's the artist interpretation. So it's an interesting balance between sometimes you're wanting to visualize Halo as relatively definitively as possible, but then sometimes you are specifically exaggerating certain things or leaning into different styles.
Scott has to reel me back in. I tend to want to go that route because I feel like there's really interesting visual storytelling and just storytelling in general. Yeah. I'd like to get those people that do certain genres of things or their artwork looks a certain way that's different than what we're used to for Halo, for the sake of seeing like what it is. What does that look like? Like I think Mobius is a great example of that. Like yes, he did great sci-fi artwork. Having him do something in the Halo universe is great. Like I'm blown away just by that graphic novel in general of what Bungie was able to bring to the table as far as creative teams are concerned, because they all brought their specific style and their specific voice to that universe.
The breadth of styles that was in that.
Yeah, and I think that's so cool. And that was kind of what we tried to do with Tales from Slipspace in some regards, is pick certain people who hadn't dipped their toe in the Halo universe to give kind of a bit of a variety to mixed results, and everybody did a great job on that book. I sometimes get a little bit too weird for Scott, and Scott's like, no, that guy, no, that's too outside of what I feel comfortable with. So that's a good thing, though. I think there's definitely a balance.
But it story isn't going to happen.
Finger painting?
Dang it.
About finding that right balance where it reaches both mine and yours.
Yes. Yes. But at the same time, we're the same guys that are nitpicking how many triangles are on the DMR sitting in that
Yeah.
page going, we need to fix that. Sorry. you need
Well,
to
and
fix
I
that."
mean, speaking of nitpicking, or we'll call it discernment.
Oh, discernment. I like that.
Yes. I know we actually have conversations, literally the three of us, on like taking in some of that fan feedback.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And it actually plays a really important role, and it plays. It's a you have to have a balanced role, obviously, but it does. It actually really helps to have people who are kind of right on it and keeping us on our toes and making sure that we're staying honest on those kinds of things. But it's also it's trying to like what kind of stories can we tell? How do we kind of give them what they want and surprise them at the same time? Is an interesting kind of like juxtaposition. But I have always appreciated from a standpoint of like how receptive and easy it is to talk to you guys and even our partners too about like, hey, can we make a pivot on something due to like a fan reception? And in all honesty, I think that at least I would like to think that Rise of Atriox and Collateral Damage both, and Rise of Atriox maybe more so only because it's all complete and it's out,
Right.
really benefited from learnings from other comic projects.
Totally. Oh, yeah.
Which
Absolutely.
I think is really kind of a shout out actually to the community. And it's one of those things that a lot of times you can look at and be like, oh my gosh, they're mad about something. But at the same time, man, it's what a blessing to have a
People mad
community,
about something.
Yes,
Yeah,
that
no, I
cares
agree.
enough about something that they'll be up in arms about it.
Yeah.
Like I think that's really kind of an awesome thing to have, and it's to quote another comic, great power comes great responsibility.
Right.
Like it's a tough balance to find.
It is a tough balance, and in a lot of cases, the unfortunate reality is a lot of times we see those reactions or the commentary well after
Yes.
the next book has already gone out. So there is sometimes windows where we see fan reception and we're like, oh, they're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The next issue is not going to make them happy.
But now it's take it in, apply it to the
Yeah.
next series
Yeah.
and the next books, and try to do something different,
Yep.
fun, but still hit all the
Yeah.
pieces.
And the thing is that you
call
can
out.
only go forward, which I think is
Right.
an important
Yeah.
thing for everybody. It's important for fans to understand, but it's also important for us because we can sometimes, I know I struggle with this, with like, oh man, don't dwell on this too much. Take it. What are your learnings from
Right.
it? Now,
Learn
how
from
do
it,
we
move
apply
on.
it? And
Yeah.
boom, let's move on and let's give them the next great thing. Which is, again, as each issue of Rise of Atriox came out and just people were like, oh, this is awesome. Whoa, this is super cool. I was like,
Right.
oh, it was just
Right.
really cool. It was a really, really, really neat feeling. Now,
And on the opposite side of the spectrum, there's certain stuff like on projects that we've released that Scott and I are not terribly excited about.
Yeah.
Like nobody noticed, nobody even comments.
Yep.
And we're like, all right, cool.
yeah, it is actually funny that sometimes.
that's a good feeling.
Yeah, sometimes it is like, oh man, I just can't, and just goes right by and everything's fine. We're like,
Yeah.
oh well, nothing to see here.
Yeah.
That's what happens when you
everything
reviewed
was
something 15 times.
Yeah, and the other things that can happen when you review something 15 times is some weird little error slips through.
Yeah.
like
You don't
which-
notice that Elite's
yes.
been running around with a battle rifle the entire time.
Or his fingers, he has the three human fingers, one elite thumb. Yeah, it can get weird for sure. Well, before we wrap up, actually, I want to get like, what are some of your like personal favorites? Let's start with your personal favorite non-Halo comics.
Ooh.
So, Scott.
Lady Killer,
All right.
Jolie Jones.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice.
Just I think it's.
What was it about it
10
that just kind of like
issues.
resonated?
I love the time period and style that
Okay.
she does. It's like a 50s
Yeah,
housewife that's also an assassin.
as you do.
Yeah,
Typical 50s
Yeah.
story
yeah,
based on actual events.
yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Tyler, what about you?
Let's see. I've been reading a lot of Rick Remender stuff. So 7 to Eternity, Tokyo Ghost, which finished I think last year. I let Scott borrow the hardcover. I'm
Nice.
kind of bummed he didn't say that was his favorite book. So we'll have to
Not
talk
done
about
with
that
it yet.
later.
He meant his favorite ones that he hasn't borrowed from you.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I forgot. It's not in the notes, but that's
Yeah.
actually what it meant to say.
Also, picking up a couple Marvel books lately. Was reading the new Cosmic Ghost Rider and the Thanos book that came out. And I was really into Mother Panic when it came out, which was Jodie Houser's book for DC's imprint, which is really good.
And Jodie Houser has worked on our stuff as well.
She did, yeah. She did one of the issues of Rise of Atriox.
Yep.
So that was a great book. I hope she can do more Halo stuff eventually someday. But she is a busy lady. She's got a lot of stuff going on. Yeah, Stranger Things comic. It's
so
awesome.
you actually you mentioned something. This is totally not on our notes, but it brings up we're now seeing like things like Marvel start to go through a lot of what we in some ways have gone through with the games versus comics versus other things, and trying to tie certain things together and not other things. What are your general thoughts on like the MCU versus the comics? Like a longtime comic fan, and this is strictly even as a fan.
Yeah.
Like, what are your thoughts of that, of the juxtaposition of something like that? Because that's something that I find really interesting. Is what's the stuff that kind of carries over versus not? And we always try to do things where, especially at least with our comics and our games, we try to, for better or worse, have it all be in the same. Live like in the same continuity, which is a blessing and a curse.
Yes, it is.
So I think that once you start to get into like the film, film TV, see like DC both and Marvel, like I can start to really see the benefits of the partitioning there. But what are like kind of as a fan your thoughts?
I agree.
That?
I actually look. I would not want to go to a movie to go see a movie of a comic book I read 20 years ago, panel for panel, page for page. There's some movies that pulled that off well. Like Sin City and some other things, because it's such an interesting visual difference.
Yes.
I am totally fine with all of those continuities living within their own, for lack of a better term, swim lane.
Yeah.
I read the comics.
Yep.
I still enjoy the movies. There's things that the movies do differently or change around, and it doesn't bother me.
It's funny. That's kind of a time-honored tradition for comics themselves.
Yeah.
How many continuities of Batman comics are there, even?
Yeah.
Or, X-Men or something like, or Spider-Man.
Right.
Like you have like, oh, is this Ultimates? Is this Amazing? Is this,
Right.
so like even there it almost kind of makes sense, I think, for longtime comic fans, where it's like, yep, it's just another thing.
Yeah.
it's another timeline.
It's another, like, I'm a big Amazing Spider-Man fan in general, so I have a decent collection of Amazing Spider-Man, if I have to say so myself.
Oh, yeah.
And then, but I also have Web of Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Spider-Man, the original title. Like, there's just so many different eras of that stuff that I choose what I want to read. Like, it makes no difference to me if there's a variety of product. I think that's great because it actually gives more people exposure to those stories or the types of things that they want to do.
Yeah, and the different mediums have different strengths too, with also how you tell certain stories.
Totally.
As well. I can think of some video games that, like, man, if you turned that into a movie, no, that's bad.
Yeah.
A lot of backtracking. A 1-for-1 CE the movie would probably be terrible.
Oh, yeah. Just go forward and keep reloading.
Forward, back, flip the tank over. Scott, what are personal favorites as far as like Halo comics? Do you have any of the Halo comic projects that's most near and dear to your heart?
Choose wisely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
There's a really good story out there you should probably pick.
Did we talk about that one already? That one was my favorite.
Should I caveat it with anything that Tyler hasn't worked on? Give us some plausible deniability
All right,
there.
so Uprising
safe.
through Halo 3 Helljumper.
My fiance actually went to Madrid, Spain. She was out, no joke, collecting salamanders from this druid forest that they only live there. She's doing it for her doctorate program.
Wow.
And she's in Madrid, visited a comic shop, and found the trade of Uprising, but all in, the King's Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Which is super cool.
Yeah.
A lot of really cool translations of things, none of which I can actually remember off the top of my head, nor would I not butcher if I tried to do it right now. But good stuff.
I think my favorite story that I've worked on so far is issue 3 of Rise of Atriox.
Okay.
I love the story.
Yeah.
I love the author, the artist. Everything kind of came together for that one with me.
Which one was that? Which is 3?
That's going to the Covenant Planet with Sigron.
Oh,
The color palettes on the...
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite little scenes in there is when they arrive at that Covenant base, and some fans immediately picked it out as like, wait a second, that's like the base you would build in Halo Wars,
Right.
Which
Yeah.
was a great tie, and obviously with Atriox also being a part of the Halo Wars
Right.
side of the
Right.
franchise, like seeing people like, wait, that's super cool, and now like I'm going into that building and
Right.
see it, like that was just super cool. Even as a fan who loved those things in the original Halo Wars when it came out, almost 10 years ago. By the
Yeah.
way. That's
Crazy.
Which is
That was the Wayshack issue, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Jonathan
Yes.
Wayshack. So good.
awesome.
That guy, I found out he did storyboards for most of the the previous Halo commercials, like Deliver
Really?
Hope. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, just randomly. We were talking, I
Cool
think, after a
connective
signing.
tissue
And he's
there.
like, yeah, I worked for one of the studios, and I did a bunch of storyboards for those commercials. I'm like, oh, that's awesome.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
We actually have some of the Deliver Hope stuff actually in our museum.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is super cool. He should come and visit.
He should. I
tell
keep
the
telling
audience.
him. They're up here for Emerald City every year. I'm like, you guys can come by and do a tour.
All right. So before we wrap up, what is next on the docket? I believe issue number 3 of Halo Collateral Damage.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that is mid-August, right? Right around there. I always try to remember the dates because sometimes it's like it'll be in the comic shops here, and it'll be in, on Amazon and darkhorse.com here.
Yeah, we
But
were right to the wire with that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, that might be mid-August.
Yeah.
now, rather than the beginning of August.
Mid-ish.
Mid-ish.
Mid could
August-ish.
be,
Yeah.
August 2nd through August 29th.
Yeah, wrapping up Collateral Damage.
Yeah.
Collateral Damage, and then we're already.
And we'll have a trade of that. Will we have a trade? Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
All right. That's good.
Holiday time.
Okay. All
End of
right.
the- end of the year.
Christmas.
Holiday time.
Yeah.
And we aren't announcing anything today, but I know that we are excited about continuing to work on comic stories.
Yes.
Yes.
So that is good. So if you are a fan of Halo Comics, there will definitely be more to look forward to. And if you are not a fan of Halo comics, then I don't. Why you
Why
wasted
are
the
you-
past 30, 40 minutes is beyond me.
Because they love Halo.
That's true.
regardless.
They love Halo regardless.
Like
That's just the
listening
sound
to
of
your
our
voice.
It is. Well,
Yes.
This is my first time on a podcast ever, so we'll change that opinion.
So
real
it's your
quick.
best appearance.
Yeah, there we go. My favorite.
Your best ever and your favorite appearance. That's right. Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thank
This
you.
was cool.
For joining. I always, again, as someone who comes from the community and who is still a fan of Halo and a fan of just like these types of entertainment properties, it's always awesome to just talk to really friends and colleagues about this kind of stuff. These are the conversations that we all just like to have anyway.
Yeah,
So-
it's kind of weird that there's a microphone here because I feel like we talk about this stuff all the time whenever we have the opportunity anyways.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys again so much for joining us. And thank you, listeners and Halo fans, for not only joining us today, but for also checking out and reading Halo comics and books and playing our games, and for also sending us tweets and feedback and doing cool YouTube videos and writing breakdown blogs of
Yeah.
that stuff. We do actually read and watch a ton of those, all of them that we possibly can. And sometimes we agree and sometimes we don't, but we always appreciate. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for your input.
Yeah, thank you so much for the time that you guys pour into this. And I think that's gonna wrap it up. But I would love to have you guys on maybe sometime later. Maybe we can talk about some of the next stuff.
Yeah, man.
Be cool.
Anytime.
Should be cool. Awesome. All right. Well, that's going to do it for us today. We will see you next time. For Scott and Tyler, I am Jeff, and thank you for joining us.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.